The next step is to try to solve equations that have more than one step in them. So we might need to apply more than one operation to find the answer. Remember, the key here is that we're always trying to isolate the variable, right? But the other thing we always have to keep in mind is that we have to keep the equation balanced, right? It's a balancing act. We want the left side and the right side to be equal to each other. So for example, for this first question, the 2x plus 6 has to always balance with the 11. We need to find out which value of x is going to make that true while at the same time keeping that equation balanced. So the way I like to think about it is, let's look at what's happening to x. Because we know opposite operations are going to be the key to isolating the variable, right? Doing the opposites. So here we can look at what's happening to x. What's happening to x is it's being multiplied by 2. I'm going to write that down. So it's being multiplied by 2, and it's being added by 6, right? So those are the two things that are happening to that x, that variable. So in order to get the x by itself, we need to undo both of those operations. So we need to divide by 2, which is opposite multiplying by 2, and we need to subtract 6. So we just need to do both of those things. But before we do that, there's one more very important thing that we have to keep in mind, and that is when we're trying to undo what's happening to x, we can't just do order of operations. We have to actually do opposite order of operations because we're trying to undo it. So usually in our order of operations, we have our B, E, D, DM we do together, and addition and subtraction we do together, right? When we're trying to undo, and we usually try to go down, when we try to undo the things that are happening to x, we want to work from the bottom to the top, right? So this is when we solve equations, or we solve for x, solve for a variable. We want to work from the bottom to the top because we want to undo BEDMAS, basically. So we call this backwards BEDMAS. So in this case, we have two things that we want to do. We want to do the opposite of multiplying by 2, so that's dividing by 2, and the opposite of this, adding 6, which is subtracting 6, but we also want to do them in the opposite order. So what we want to do is we actually want to subtract 6 first, and then we want to divide by 2. So it's the opposite operations in the opposite order. So how does that look on the actual equation? We're going to divide it with the line here again. But the first thing we're going to do is we're going to subtract 6. Because what that's going to do is going to very nicely get rid of this 6 here. So we have our 2x equals, well, what's 11 minus 6? 11 minus 6 is 5, right? And then we notice that this equation right here looks very similar to those equations from the previous part, right? And how do we get the x by itself? Well, we have to divide by 2, right? Divide by 2 to cancel that out. So x is just going to equal, oh, and then we have to do the same thing to this side, right? 5 divided by 2. So what's 5 divided by 2? That's the answer. Well, if we do it in our calculator, x equals 5 divided by 2 is 2.5. So the answer is 2.5. That's the thing that makes this true, right? So 2 times 2.5 plus 6. You can try that on a calculator to check it out, to see if it works, to check your answer. I'm going to do it right now. 2 times 2.5 plus 6. Yep, gives me 11, right? So this is the correct answer. So I know there was a lot involved there, but very simply, all we needed to do was we needed to do the two opposite operations in the opposite order. Subtract 6 and divide by 2. So the key here is we're always doing the division the subtraction addition first, and then we do the division or multiplication last, right? So I want you to try this your turn question yourself. Try it yourself, see if you can get the answer. Pause the video here. Go. So the answer you should have got is x equals 2.5. It's actually the same as the first one. That's just a fluke. So if you were stuck or you weren't sure exactly how to do it, remember, we need to apply the opposite operations to get the x by itself. So the first thing we needed to get rid of was this plus 5. So how do you get rid of a plus 5? You subtract 5, right? So that was the first operation that we did. And then how do you get rid of this 4 times x? Well, you divide by 4. So that was the second operation we did. So all we did was we subtracted by 4 or 5, and then we divided by 4, right? These are the original operations. So originally, x is being multiplied by 4 and added by 5. We just need to do the opposite. Okay? All right. So now there are some questions below, 4 more questions below with answers at the bottom of the page. I want you to try all 4 of these questions yourself. So remember, the important part is that you're showing your work, right? Showing your work like we did up here. Because obviously the answers are at the bottom. Those answers are just meant to check your answers to see if you get the right answers. Okay? So make sure you try each question and you check your answers with them at the bottom. If they don't match the ones at the bottom, see if you can go back and find a mistake that you made. Okay? Pause the video here. Try them now. So these are the operations that you needed to apply in each of these cases. In this one, we needed to subtract 9 to get rid of that 9, and then divide by 2 to get rid of that 2. This one, we needed to add 12 to get rid of the negative 12, and divide by 3 to get rid of that 3. This one, we needed to subtract 2 to get rid of the 2, and divide by 10 to get rid of that 10. This one, we needed to add 10 to get rid of this 10, and divide by 2 to get rid of that 2. If you do that, you should get the answers below. So the last little piece here, it's the exact same thing, except you might have noticed that all these questions involve division, right? You can probably guess what the last ones involve. Multiplication, right? So these ones look complicated, but they're actually solved in the exact same way. So if we look at here, what's happening to x? Well, it's being divided by 3 and then added by 6. So those are what's happening to it. Divided by 3 and then adding 6. So what's the opposite operations or the backwards BEDMAS on that? Well, we know we have to subtract 6, right? And then we have to multiply by 3 because the opposite of dividing by 3 is multiplying by 3. So it's the same thing. So let's try that. Let's try subtracting 6 from both sides. It's going to get rid of that 6 here. So we're left with x over 3 equals 4 minus 6 is negative 2. And then to get rid of that x divided by 3, we just need to multiply by 3. Right? So that's going to cancel that out. So x is going to equal negative 2 times 3 is negative 6. There's our answer. Okay? So I want you to pause the video here. Try the your turn question yourself. Unpause to see a solution. So if you did it correctly, the answer you should have got for this one is 20. 20 divided by 5 is 4, plus 2 is 6. So it makes sense for our answer, right? And if you're curious about the operations involved, well, let's look first at what happened to x. X was divided by 5 and then added by 2. What's the opposite of that? Well, first we subtracted 2 and then we multiplied by 5, right? In order to get 20. So, your turn. 4 more questions with the answers at the bottom of the page, all about those same types of questions. So pause the video here, try them. When you unpause, I will give you a few hints on how to solve them. So here we go. These are the operations that you needed to apply to get the x by itself. So in the first case, we needed to add 4 to get rid of this 4 and multiply by 4 to get rid of that 4. For the second one, we needed to subtract by 3 to get rid of this 3 and multiply by 5 to get rid of that 5. In this one, we needed to subtract 2 and then multiply by 6. And in this one, we needed to add 1 and then multiply by 2. Okay? So there we go. That should get you the 4 answers at the bottom of the page. Now we just have a few mixed problems here. So some of these are one-step equations, some of these are two-step equations. I want you to try all of these questions over here yourself. The answers are at the bottom of the page, okay? If you're really stuck, you can, of course, ask your teacher for a little bit of help. Good luck.